Claire here, and welcome back to my little urban homestead, where today we're celebrating fall with two delicious homemade treats: pumpkin spice coffee creamer and pumpkin butter Pop Tarts. And they're very flaky, and I cannot wait to show you how I got them to do that. Okay, raise your hand if you are intimidated by pie crust, pastry crust, anything that's like a crust type thing, even biscuits. I'm over here raising both of my hands because I love to cook and I love to try, but I never feel like I've ever been able to accomplish it to my satisfaction until today. So I'm going to show you how I came about getting really flaky crust, almost like baklava texture, very like flaky, very layery. So if you're into that kind of crust, let me tell you. So you start off with your flour, and I used 2.5 cups of flour. I used 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, and then I whisked all of that together. And here is the intimidating part for me, is the butter. So they always say to cube the butter, don't work it too much. And I never quite get that right. But so today, let me tell you, you want to have cold butter that just came out of the fridge. And see this, what's this called? Grater that I'm using. There are 3 different sides. There's like a normal side, there's kind of a larger hole side, and then there's like the skinny hole side. And the large hole side is the one that I used today. And it was the perfect size to get the perfect proportions of butter. And for this, I used 2 sticks of butter. So you know any recipe is going to be amazing when it calls for butter, and especially if it calls for 2 sticks of it. So I won't bore you with grating all of that, but just know that I did. Once you have all your butter and your flour, start turning it over, trying to incorporate it, not necessarily kneading it, but just kind of grabbing the flour, grabbing the butter, sort of smushing it together a little bit, not into one giant clump, because you want there to still be very individual pieces. Now, most recipes say like pea-sized pieces. Mine were a little bit on the bigger side, and I think that is why the pastry turned out so flaky. But you know, I do this until I feel pretty satisfied with the consistency and the coverage. I just used my hands and kind of crumbled it up together. And then in a separate bowl, I had put some cold ice water, and I took 1/2 cup of that and put it into this other bowl. And then I just added in a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. It's supposed to make it a little bit more tender, and I've never done that in the past. So that might also be the secret fantastic ingredient, is the apple cider vinegar. So just 1 teaspoon of that, and you mix that up. Grab a fork, because for this next part, you're gonna just take your fork and you're gonna gradually add in the apple cider water mixture and mix it all together, so that, but you're not gonna do it all at one time, just a little bit at a time. It's gonna seem like it's not the right amount of water, trust me on that, and it's gonna feel like it's still too crumbly. I think in the past I've always added a little bit too much water just because I felt like it should look a little bit more doughy, but in this instance I didn't. I really did use self-control. I used all 1/2 cup of water and 1 teaspoon of the apple cider vinegar. And then if you feel like it needs more water, you can add additional tablespoons of cold water at a time until you get the right consistency. And for this recipe, I did end up using 1 additional tablespoon of ice cold water. And at this point, at the end of forming this little dough ball, I just used my hands to kind of squish it together. Now, it was still kind of crumbly, as you can see, and I was internally freaking out. So if you're an expert at pastry, you know, let me know what yours looks like usually. But so the purpose of this was I was going to put it on the counter, and I was going to form it into sort of like a disc shape. and then I was going to wrap it up into plastic, but it kind of felt like it was still going to fall apart. I didn't stress. I didn't want to touch it. You don't want to play with it too much. You don't want to melt the butter. So I just left well enough alone. And then I wrapped it in plastic, and kind of once the plastic was on it, I squished it a little bit more and added some of the flaky bits in so that I could kind of like roll it in there together. But then you want to put it in the fridge for at least a minimum of an hour, because you want that butter to get nice and cold again for when you go to roll it out, so that you have more control over it. So since most of my recipes today take pumpkin, because it is a pumpkin kind of day and a pumpkin kind of season, I went ahead and popped open some of my canned pumpkins from last year, and I want to use them up this year because I'm going to can some more from our pumpkins that we grew in the garden this year. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn this into puree. Y'all, tell me why it's taken me 37 years to get one of these little blender wand things, because this has really revolutionized my world like the last, I don't know, couple of months since I actually got one and have actually been using it. So right now we're going to start making our filling for our pastry, and that is going to be a pumpkin butter recipe. This was really easy to make, and the content of this was enough to make the pastries, and also I had a pint's worth left over to put in the fridge for the next couple of weeks to enjoy as well. So if you are not like a huge pumpkin butter fan and you don't want extra to put on your toast, you can just make this probably half this recipe. But what I did was I started off with 2 cups of homemade pumpkin puree, and then I put 1/2 cup of apple cider, and then 1/4 cup of maple syrup, and 1/3 cup of brown sugar. And then you mix all of those ingredients very well and incorporate them all. And now it is spice time. I put 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1/4 teaspoon of cloves, and 1/4 teaspoon of ginger. Then finish it off with a pinch of salt. And then you're going to stir and mix everything together and turn it on to medium heat. You're going to bring the mixture to a simmer. And once it starts to simmer, you're going to reduce the heat to low. And then you just let it stay on low heat for about 20 to 30 minutes, and you come back and stir it occasionally to prevent it from sticking. But the mixture should thicken up and become spreadable. Now that our filling is finished and just cooling, I'm going to go ahead and get started on rolling out this dough. And I was still at the point where I was nervous about this because it seemed kind of crumbly, and I was just going to have faith that the rolling it would do the magic of making it kind of all come together. And one thing that I realized pretty quickly was that I actually should have cut this into 2 pieces of dough to work with, because one was huge and unmanageable, and I just don't have a big enough counter space for it. As I was rolling, the butter kept sticking to the rolling pin, and you know what? I don't think mine is the best, honestly. So if you have a favorite rolling pin, I would love if you leave your favorite one in the comments, because I am always looking for, kitchen tools that make my life a little bit easier. This is just a really basic one that I've had for a gajillion years. When I got it to the thinness that I thought was maybe appropriate, I think it could have been thinner, but once again, my rolling pin is what it is. I sort of started drawing strips, and then I made my first little square for the Pop-Tart and used it sort of as a pattern to continue cutting out other pieces. Semi-pro tip is to use a flat spatula to get your pieces off of the counter, because that butter will have wanted to stick, and you don't really want to try to pick it up and pull it with your hands because it is very pliable. Now for the fun part, the stuffing the Pop Tarts with their filling, and you want to only use maybe about 2 tablespoons of the filling before you put the lid on top, or the lid, the topper, and then you just take a fork and you crimp around the edges. Now, just to forewarn you, my filling did kind of come out of some of my Pop Tarts, but at the end you'll see it all worked out okay. So don't let that discourage you or think you're doing anything wrong, because it happened to me. And maybe next time it'll happen less. Maybe I'll be more seasoned of a chef at this Pop-Tart thing. But I just took extra scraps of the dough and got the extra off of my pan. Before you put it in the oven, you need to preheat it to 375. And go ahead and crack an egg, because you're going to want to do an egg wash for the tops of your pastries.
You want to eat them? Hopefully they turn out yummy.
And finally, it's time to pop them in the oven for about 25 minutes, or until they get nice and golden brown on top. So while that is cooking, I am making some coffee creamer, because I definitely want to have a cup of coffee with my treat, and really every morning. And I just am not a huge fan of all the additives and weird chemicals that are in coffee creamers. So this is my first attempt at making coffee creamer by myself. So what I did was I took 1 cup of whole milk, and then I added 1 cup of creamer into a saucepan. And then I added 6 tablespoons of maple syrup, but you could put more in if you like your coffee creamer more sweet. I do like mine sweet, but not super, super sweet. Put 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract and 1 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice, and then stir all that together. I love the pattern it makes with the light and the dark. Oh, I almost forgot. You put 4 tablespoons of pumpkin puree, and to get that super pumpkin-y flavor. And then just continue to whisk it as it is over about medium-low heat. You want to whisk it pretty frequently until it's steaming, not boiling, and this helps to infuse the flavors. And then now you've got yourself some pumpkin spice coffee creamer. But I've got to say, this was not made for pouring. I ended up spilling like half of my creamer, so you should probably yield more. And I just kept trying to pour it from this container, and spilling all over my counter and beside my stove. So I'm gonna have to move that out and clean it, or else it's gonna smell like spoiled coffee creamer. Eventually I got the genius idea to put this measuring cup that has a spout in the sink, and then pour the pot into that, then pour that into my jar, and that worked out a lot better than before. And now it is time to pull the grand finale out of the oven, and I'm just going to transfer them over onto a cooling rack, because while they're cooling down just a smidge, I'm going to make a maple glaze to go on top of them. But I can already see just how fluffy and flaky the pastry dough is, and I'm at this point just so ravenous and ready to try them. The maple glaze is so quick and easy to whip up. I used 1 cup of powdered sugar, 2 tablespoons of maple syrup, and then 2 tablespoons of heavy whipping cream, and then a fill it with your heart measurement of vanilla extract. and then whip that up until it gets to the consistency that you want. If you want it to be a little bit more runny, then you can add more of the whipping cream. Or if you want it to be even thicker than this, which I think this was the perfect icing consistency, you can add more powdered sugar. I like to put the glaze on things like cinnamon rolls and things like this when the pastries are still warm. That way it really gets to melt into it and just become one with the pastry. So that is what I recommend. Don't wait till it's super cool unless you want the icing to be a note all of itself. But if you want it to kind of, go and be delicious and mixed together, then do it this way. And now that we have thoroughly enjoyed our treats and waited so patiently, we're going to enjoy them. And for me and Connor, it was a hit. Katana is so picky that she did not even try it. I don't even think she took a bite. She was more interested with playing with pumpkins, but that's okay. You can't always win, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on this cozy fall day. If you enjoyed these recipes, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more simple living and seasonal inspiration. I hope you guys have an awesome week, and I cannot wait to see you next time.